next voice you are going to hear is that of A.J. Hayes, President of the International Association of Machinists, speaking in St. Louis on March the 31st, 1959, at a meeting of Local Lodge number 837.
Officers and members of Lodge 837, my good and old colleague Sam Newman, visiting representatives of other District 9 lodges, ladies and gentlemen. I want to make one thing very clear to you, that while I greatly appreciate the introduction that I received from your very gracious and generous chairman, that I am primarily and by first choice the president of the Machinists Union. And that as president of your union, that I am your representative and your servant, and that I am the one who is proud to be here, and I am particularly proud because the turnout at this meeting is a very, very encouraging sign to me in today's troubled labor movement. It's customary for most speakers to lead the audience to believe that the subject of their talk or something that has happened at the meeting reminded them of a story. Well, I'm going to be a little bit different. Nothing that I'm going to say to you reminds me of any story that I think will tell you better than I can tell you, in other words, what I want to say to you. But I do have a story that I want to tell to you, not because it's related to anything that I'm going to talk about, but just because I think it's a pretty good story. And to set the tempo for this meeting, I'd like to share this good story with you. The story is about three Englishmen that met in one of these compartments on an English train in the station in London. And in their preliminary discussion, they found out that they were all going to the same destination about 6½ hours away. And one of the Englishmen said to the other two, since we're going to be together for about 6½ hours, it might be advisable if we introduce each other and tell the other something about our background. And the other Englishman chimed in and said, I think that's a very good idea. Why don't you start, sir? He says, very well, I will. He said, my name is John Henry Cunningham. I'm a brigadier general in the British Army, and I'm very proud of my record in the British Army. I have served in a number of the theaters in World War II, and he said I have received a number of medals for my efforts. Life has been very good to us. He said, I have a wife and a beautiful home on the Thames. He says, we own a 14-room house on the Thames. And he said, we've been blessed with two sons who are now grown. And he said, they too have been very fortunate in life. They too have left their mark. He says, one is an engineer, and because of the research work that he has done, he has been drafted into the service of our government. He is now working in India on some very, very important engineering projects for the British government. He said the other one is a scientist, and he said, like the rest of the family, he too has been rather successful. And because of his great success, he too has been pressed into the service of our government and is now working on some very secretive scientific work for the government. That, gentlemen, is about all there is to the outline of my life. So he looked at the other gentleman in the compartment. He said, well, sir, he said, this is rather a coincidence. He said, my name is Henry John Farthington. And he said, I too am a brigadier general in the British Army. It's strange that we have never met, because I served in some of the same theaters of war that you did. And he said, what's even more coincidental, we too live on the Thames, not more than 2 miles from where you live. We have a 12-room house. He said, life has been good to us too. I have a beautiful wife, and we too have 2 sons. And he said, both of our sons are also working for the British government. One is an archaeologist, and the other one is an astronomer. And their discoveries in their particular professions were so outstanding that they were pressed into the service of the government. That, gentlemen, is about all there's to the outline of my life. So these 2 rather pompous gentlemen then looked at the 3rd Englishman in the coach, and he knew that they expected him to give an outline of his life. He says, well, gentlemen, he said, I'm afraid that I probably don't even belong in this compartment with you. He said, my name is Jim Walsh. And he said, I've served in the British Army for about 18 years, but the highest rank that I ever acquired was that of sergeant. He said, I don't live on the Thames. He said, in fact, it could be said, I guess, that I live on the other side of the tracks. He says, I'm not married, but I have 2 sons. They're both brigadier generals. Well, so much for our opposition. In the invitation that I received from your very efficient and shrewd secretary, Sister Glasgow, it was suggested that I speak to you about the importance and the accomplishments of our organization, particularly in view of the current anti-union climate that exists in our country. And while I intend to tell you, at least report to you, on some of the important things affecting our organization, I intend to broaden the suggested theme of my talk to cover the entire labor movement as well as the IAFM, and to speak about our problems as well as our accomplishments and our opposition. And I say this because in my 42 years in the labor movement, all of which were put in the IAFM, I have been convinced that our organization, the rest of the labor movement, everything that we have accomplished, all of our problems and all of our failures and all of our opposition are all related to one another. In other words, there's just no doubt that the manner in which we deal with any of the phases of our activities influences and affects the activities or the accomplishments in all of the other areas. So I'm going to speak rather generally to you about the general situation and the general problems in the labor movement, because those problems are also the problems of your own organization. I believe that a frank and objective analysis of both the good and the bad in the organized labor movement and a realistic review of our problems is the only effective way to improve and strengthen the labor movement, is the only effective way to correct our mistakes, and it's the only way that we can effectively deal with our opposition. But before I talk about our accomplishments or our opposition, I want to talk first about some handicaps, some internal handicaps and differences that we have in the labor movement and that are costing us a tremendous price. Differences, of course, are not unusual to organized labor. In fact, it was because of differences that the labor movement was born, and that is differences between employees and employers. But unfortunately, we in the labor movement have had internal differences ever since the inception of the labor movement. And even though such differences may not be new or unusual, I think they are a reflection upon us, and they are very costly to the rank and file membership. In fact, the internal differences that have existed within the labor movement and that exist today have cost and are costing the rank and file membership substantial amounts in your paychecks and in your working conditions. I mean by that, if it had not been for the differences, or if the differences had been less than they were, that you would be getting more money today and that you would be working under better conditions. Actually, I suppose it can be said that the principal differences in the labor movement almost since the inception of the labor movement have been jurisdictional controversies, and all types of jurisdictional controversies between unions affiliated with the Federation and even within individual unions. I think probably the best proof of this fact lies in the statistics that were gathered by the AFL-CIO Unity Committee prior to the merger of the AFL-CIO. As some of you at least know, I was a member of that Unity Committee. And during the course of our discussions, during the period of time that we were trying to agree upon the terms and conditions of merging the AFL and CIO, we asked the National Labor Relations Board to furnish us election statistics between AFL and CIO unions for a 2-year period between 1951 and 1953. The board furnished us with these statistics showing that in this period of time there had been 1,727 attempted raids between AFL and CIO unions that involved the National Labor Relations Board, and 1,727 elections were held in this period of time. As a result of these elections, the AFL unions weaned away from the CIO unions 44,000 members, and the CIO unions weaned away from the AFL unions 40,000 members. On the basis of those figures, it looks as though the AFL unions gained 4,000 members, but that is not the full picture. In the same period of time, 4,496 of the people participating in these elections voted against either the AFL or the CIO because of the raiding tactics. And the sum total of 2 years of effort involving more than 600 organizers and officers, 4,496 members left the labor movement. And you know what it cost us to lose 4,496 members? The cold sum of $12 million. And that's a conservative estimate of the cost of these 1,727 raids between AFL and CIO unions in that period of time. $12 million that we should have devoted to the objectives of the labor movement, to the benefit of the rank and file membership of the labor movement. I think perhaps further proof of the tremendous cost to our membership of the internal friction and dissension within the labor movement is the manner or is the extent to which the combined labor movement has organized the workers of our country. At the present time, there are approximately 45 million workers in the United States eligible to membership in existing unions. And of this number, we now have organized approximately 16 million. That means that there are almost 29 million workers in the United States eligible to membership in existing unions that are not now members of the organized labor movement, many of whom are discouraged and disgusted with the friction and dissension that exists primarily as between the top leadership of most of the unions. I think perhaps there is even a little proof of the terrific price we pay for this friction in the statistics of our own membership. When I say our own membership, I mean the membership of the IAFM. And I say this because I think that we must assume our share of the blame in this overall picture. And when I give you these figures, I want you to understand that our organization probably has fared better than any other organization on the North American continent in the last 14 to 15 years. But in the period between August of 1950 and about a year and 3 months ago, our organization grew by more than 500,000 members. In this period of time, we were without question the fastest growing labor organization in the United States. But in this same period of time that we picked up 500 and some odd thousand members, we took into our organization, via initiations, reinstatements, and so on, almost 1.5 million members. In other words, of the 1.5 million members that we took into our organization in that period of time, we kept approximately 1/3. And this is the general story in the labor movement, accepting that the figures in most other organizations are even represent even a greater loss than the figures that I have given to you. Yes, the membership of the trade union movement, who actually are the owners of the trade unions, have paid a terrific price for the luxury of internal bickering and dissension and jurisdictional disputes. Ever since the merger of the AFL-CIO, which incidentally I predict is going to stick regardless of propaganda to the contrary, jurisdictional differences and internal bickering continue to persist. And what makes this even worse, at the present time, these differences, every time there is controversy between Reuther and Meany, every time there is controversy on the AFL-CIO Executive Council, this controversy and these differences are being exploited to the maximum by the press of the country and by our opposition. You probably have read in the newspapers about the great argument between Reuther and Meany at the recent meeting of the AFL-CIO Executive Council at San Juan. I was there. I participated in that council meeting, and the press exaggerated the differences at least tenfold. So everything we do that lends itself to exploitation is being exploited by our opposition. In fact, I think I must say that the major problem in the Federation today is still jurisdiction. And this is evidenced in the current dispute between the Metal Trades Department and the Industrial Union Department, and the Industrial Union Department and the Building Trades Department, as well as the jurisdictional differences between the individual unions. Actually, the organized labor movement in the United States can hardly afford to continue this luxury, the luxury of internal bickering and differences in face of the anti-labor climate that pervades our country today. Never in the history of the labor movement, never in the history of our country, has there been greater organized opposition to the labor movement, not only from anti-union employers, but from legislative bodies and even from our present administration in Washington. And this, of course, is evidenced by the very active campaigns for anti-labor legislation. The National Right to Work Law campaign, the present campaign in our National Congress for so-called labor reform legislation, the present campaign for further amendments to the Taft-Hartley Act, all designed, and I say this with due thought and consideration, all designed intentionally to weaken the effectiveness of the organized labor movement. There is just no doubt about it. And I charge that many in this administration, in the continuation of the McClellan Committee investigations, in the administration labor reform bill, are more concerned with weakening the effectiveness of the organized labor movement than they are with cleaning up corruption or wrongdoing. And lest I be misunderstood about corruption and wrongdoing, let me make it perfectly clear to you that this is not a minor problem in the labor movement. And this is a problem that we in the labor movement must do something about. No one, whether he holds an office at a local level or at the top level of the labor movement, regardless of the contribution that he may have made to the membership of his organization, can justify using his office for his own personal gain, can justify taking $1 of the membership's money for his own personal gain. And to that extent, we in the labor movement must take affirmative, effective action against those who are guilty of betraying their trust. Because remember, this union belongs to you. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you as much as it does to me. And every other union belongs to the membership and not to the officers. So, before I go on to tell you the real facts about corruption in the trade union movement, let me make it very clear that I, for one, do not condone or excuse any of the corruption that does exist. And I, for one, believe that we must take effective action by removing those who are guilty, whether they be at the local level or whether they be at the top level. But what are the facts about corruption, now that you know what my position is? The Fact is that there is corruption in the trade union movement. Some of it has been disclosed by the Douglas Committee. More has been disclosed by the McClellan Committee. Some more has been disclosed by the Ethical Practices Committee of the Federation itself. In the labor movement at the present time, there are approximately 440,000 national, international, district, state, and local officials of unions who are in a position to betray their trust if they want to do so. And of this 440-some thousand officials, after an investigation lasting 5 years, an intensive investigation with the most professional investigators that can be obtained, the Douglas Committee and the McClellan Committee have uncovered evidence that indicates that some 61 persons in or remotely connected with the trade union movement may be guilty of corruption or wrongdoing. We know that some of them are, but all of the testimony before the McClellan Committee was not conclusive proof against all. But assuming that all 61 are guilty, and assuming, as we must, that there are more than 61 in the trade union movement who are guilty, because there are more than have been uncovered so far. Even this would indicate beyond any reasonable doubt to any honest person that there is really less corruption in the trade union movement than there is in other segments of our society. And I say to you without any fear of successful contradiction that if the Douglas Committee and the McClellan Committee had investigated, or in the future investigate, industry or business or the professions, the medical profession or the legal profession, or the bankers, or the politicians, if you please, that over a 5-year period of time they will find much more corruption in any one of these segments of our society than they have thus far found in the trade union movement. They are not naive. They know this. They have read Life magazine. They have access to the statistics that show that in a period of 1 year, more than $3 billion, and I didn't say million, more than $3 billion is embezzled in business and industry every year. So far, the total amount of money involved in the allegations before the McClellan Committee amounts to several million. And this is over a period of years and years and years. And yet, the facts are that in business alone, more than $3 billion a year is embezzled, and the McClellan Committee doesn't appear to be interested. So, we have this problem in the trade union movement, besides the other problem, because regardless of the facts that I have outlined to you, this is no excuse for any corruption in the trade union movement. We must do something about it, and when we do something about it, it does divert our time and our effort and our money from our objectives. In view of the very grave problems facing the labor movement, it's the responsibility of every honest and objective officer and of every member of the organized labor movement to cast aside their personal prejudices, their prejudices against their fellow man, and actually fulfill their obligation to the organized labor movement by helping to effectively counter our opposition so that we can devote more of our time to our real objectives. Unfortunately, as things stand at the present time, much time and effort will have to be devoted to fighting our opposition, because our opposition is very, very potent. And all of the time and effort that we devote to fighting our opposition, to our own internal friction and dissension, is always diverted away from our real objectives. Because our job, the job of the labor movement, isn't almost finished. In fact, it has just about begun. I suppose we can go back to almost any period in our history, particularly any period in the history of organized labor, and find that there were those who felt, like many in this administration feel today, that organized labor has just about reached the peak of its objectives. We have made progress, of course. I don't think that anyone can deny that we are responsible for the high standard of life that exists in the United States. We're responsible for the fact that in the United States today we can boast of the highest standard of living in the world. Nobody can deny that we're responsible for the mass purchasing power that makes our mass production possible, because we are the ones who forced employers to pay the wages that are being paid in the country today. No one can deny that the organized labor movement is responsible for shorter hours, even though they are not short enough today. No one can deny that we're responsible for vacations, for health and welfare plans, for seniority, and all other conditions of employment. And how many of you know that way back that the organized labor movement led the fight for free public schools in the United States, and that the labor movement, those who went before us, can actually claim the credit for the establishment of a free public school system when most employers and representatives of business were opposed to free public schools? They were opposed to even the idea of an elementary education for the little people, because they argued that who will there be to do the menial work if everyone gets an 8th grade education? The labor movement led that fight. We're responsible for Social Security, for railroad retirement, for workmen's compensation, for unemployment compensation. In fact, almost all of the social reform legislation on the statute books of the federal government or state governments had its beginning or its support from and in the organized labor movement. But notwithstanding those accomplishments, which are relatively good, but I said relatively, do you know that even today, 1959, we have more than 8 million families? Now, I said families, not persons. More than 8 million families in the United States whose family income, the total income received by all members of the family, is $2,000 a year or less. 8 million families. And yet, our administration tells us that our job is just about done. How many of you know that our public school system in the United States is still very inadequate? The opportunities for higher education are denied to the majority of those who would take advantage of those opportunities if they had them. 7 million children in the United States are still going to elementary schools on a shift basis. 55% of our schools still have outside toilet facilities. Those are governmental statistics. The statistics of the same administration that tells us that we have just about reached the peak of our accomplishments. Today, in 1959, we in a country that has a reputation of being the most civilized in the entire world, still have 9,800,000 functionally illiterate adults, 25 years of age or more. 9,800,000 functionally illiterate people in the United States aged 25 years or over. And incidentally, in case you think that this is made up of the minorities, let me disabuse your mind. Of this almost 10 million, almost 8 million are whites. And how about health? Have we completed our job there? Have we gone as far as we can go? I don't think anyone can deny that we have made great progress, or the medical profession has made great progress in advancing the miracles of modern medicine and surgery. But how many of our people are in a position to take advantage of the miracles of our modern medicine and surgery? 2 years ago, according to, again, official governmental statistics, we lost 540 million man-days of work due to sickness and injury, most of which could have been avoided if our people had access to the miracle of the modern medicine and surgery that is available to them in the United States. In addition to these remaining problems that haven't been solved over all of these years, we have the additional problem and the perennial problem of unemployment in the United States today. Apparently, our administration doesn't think that unemployment is serious, because it's very apathetic and indifferent to the problem, doesn't think that anything should be done about it, is opposed to any type of pump priming, is opposed to any type of federal action to relieve the situation for the millions of people who are without jobs. In fact, we have every reason to believe that there are those in this administration and in this Congress and in business and industry who feel that the type of unemployment and the extent of unemployment that we have in the United States is good for our kind of society. What are the facts? The Department of Labor tells us that there are 4,700,000 unemployed in the United States. Well, this isn't quite true, because the figure is much closer to 7 million than 4.7 million, because the Department of Labor figures do not include those who are working part-time. Does not include that part of their time that they are not working, and it does not include all of those who would come into the employment market as a result of graduation from school, as a result of attaining an age when they normally go to work, and are not looking for jobs because there are no jobs to be had. And the objective economists figure that if we include all of those people who would be working if there were jobs available, that we would find that unemployment is closer to 7 million, in fact, above 6.5 million, than it is to the figures of the Department of Labor, or 4.5 million. And notwithstanding the some other facts that are available to this administration doesn't feel that anything should be done about it. They feel that automatic evolution will take care of it. Now, let's see whether automatic developments in our society will take care of it. From the beginning of this so-called recession, which is pretty close to a depression, up to the present time, notwithstanding unemployment, production in our industrial plants has increased 84%. And employment, due to new people coming into the market, due to the increase in our overall number of employed persons, increased 26%. So we have a situation where production increases 84%, with plants being undermanned, and employment increases only 26%. And if this continues, it can only mean that progressively more and more and more and more people will be unemployed unless we do something about it. And this is the primary reason that at the meeting in San Juan, the AFL-CIO Executive Council passed a resolution that henceforth we were going to make a very serious demand for a 35-hour week. I can tell you one thing: if we don't do it, and if we don't force it just like we did the 12-hour day when they were working 14, the 10-hour day when the 12-hour day was a normal work day, and later on the 8-hour day, if we don't force the 35-hour week now, I can tell you that industry and business and this administration never will. There's something else that's very significant about this period of so-called recession. You know, the very same thing that happened in this recession, the increase in the army of unemployed from 2.75 million to 3 million to 3.5 million to 4 million to 4.5 million and so on. That very thing happened in the early 1930s. We started out with a small army of unemployed, and this army continued to grow, but it grew much faster. And in a relatively short period of time, we had almost 13 million people out of work in the United States. There's a reason that we haven't slid that rapidly into that kind of depression this time. There are a number of reasons. The organized labor movement is primarily responsible for that fact. First of all, because of the number of contracts we have, because of the wages which we negotiated in our contracts, workers today had more purchasing power than they had back in the 1930s. Because we are covered by term contracts, the employers couldn't do today what they did back in the late fall of 1929 and 1930. They couldn't arbitrarily cut your wages because the contract wouldn't permit it, and because we might go out on strike if they attempted it. So they weren't in the same position to do what they did then, because those of you who remember those days remember that throughout the length and breadth of this country, employer after employer was cutting his wages 15, 25, 30, 50% in many, many cases. And as he cut his wages, those who were working lost most of their purchasing power. And more people lost purchasing power, and this kept adding to the unemployed. This time we had a little reserve purchasing power. And then, too, those who were unemployed now receive unemployment compensation, which they didn't receive back in the 1930s. Some of them receive supplemental unemployment benefits as a result of their contracts. And all of this has kept the general purchasing power of our people way above the levels that they were back in the 1930s, and it kept us from sliding faster and faster into a depression. I said before that there were some, I believe in this administration, and I know in business and industry, who feel that unemployment is good for us. That what they call a reasonable amount of unemployment is the only guarantee, the only sure guarantee that we have against inflation in our kind of society. And that's why they don't want to do anything about unemployment. Well, we're having a conference in Washington next week. The AFL-CIO is having a big protest meeting on the question of unemployment in the National Guard Armory in Washington. We expect to gather more than 6,000 people in Washington to let this administration know that we mean business, that we expect this Congress and this administration to do something about this problem now before the problem becomes too severe. And in connection with this conference, some of us were talking with some of the leaders in our Senate. And they agreed with us that this was a serious problem that needed immediate attention from Congress. But they said, you know, those who are opposed to doing anything about unemployment challenge us to prove to them that the people are concerned about this problem. The people aren't concerned about unemployment. It's only a few labor leaders who are concerned about it. And then they tell us that their office is flooded with solicited telegrams and letters solicited by labor's opposition urging them to do something about inflation, urging them to do something about labor reform legislation, urging them to keep organized labor from demanding more and more and more in wage increases. They contend in these letters and these telegrams that it's our demands for increases in wages that are causing inflation, and we are the ones who must be stopped. And we saw these telegrams and letters in the offices of some of the leaders in our Senate. They're being promoted by our opposition as a well-planned campaign to keep Congress from doing something about unemployment, but to get Congress to do something to weaken the effectiveness of the organized labor movement. You'll recall that even the president came out and suggested that the steel workers go very, very easy on the steel industry insofar as wage increases are concerned. Notwithstanding the fact that the steel industry has increased their prices 6 different times over and way over and beyond the wage increases that they granted to the steel workers. It's up to us in the labor movement to let our representatives in Congress know how we feel about the issues that affect us. It's up to us to send them telegrams and to letters and let them know what we think is the big problem in our country today. And I am urging you, as individuals, to write longhand notes to your senators and your congressmen, and perhaps to the leader of the majority in the Senate, to Lyndon Johnson, and let him know that you want something done about unemployment in this country. And I am sure that if you do, and if you do this in your own handwriting, in a very simple letter, that those letters will be much more important to Congress than the solicited letters that are coming from the organized campaign of opposition to the organized labor movement. And then, of course, we have the additional problem of the campaign for reducing governmental expenditures for the purpose of saving tax dollars. This administration and many in business and industry and their professional organizations have taken a position that we can afford to reduce governmental expenditures even in the very vital area of defense for the purpose of balancing a budget and for the purpose of reducing taxes. Reducing taxes for you? Oh no. But reducing taxes for those with the greatest ability to pay. The organized labor movement actually has led the agitation for the strongest possible defense of the country. We have come out forthright and have opposed cuts in budgets that affected the defenses of our country, while many on the other side, including the National Association of Manufacturers, have favored reduction in governmental expenses even in defense items on the basis of all types of arguments. I wonder if we are in a position where we can afford to gamble in this these very, very crucial times with a matter as important as this. I believe, and the labor movement in general believes, that the situation as between the communistic world and the communistic ideology and that of the free world is a very, very serious one. Let's compare for a moment the relative merits of both sides of this very important question. In manpower and resources, both developed and potential, there isn't any question that the communistic world, Russia and all of her satellites, Russia, China and their satellites, have a tremendous advantage over the United States. Certainly they have much more manpower. Certainly their resources, if and when developed, will be at least on a par with ours. The only advantage that we in the free world have today, and most of that advantage lies right in the borders of the United States, are our technological know-how and the quality of our people. And yet, we have such great apathy and indifference with regard to all of the ingredients that go into this advantage. Add together all of these problems and concerns, and it is all too clear that we in the labor movement have a pretty rough road ahead. We have a terrific challenge, greater probably than we have ever had before, And we also have a terrific responsibility. The degree of our success in dealing with all of these problems and still representing our people in our normal activities and functions will depend upon our determination, our ability, and our willingness to put aside our petty bickering and our internal dissension so that we can use our time and the time and effort that is otherwise wasted by these selfish luxuries in our fight for the common good. And I want to repeat in closing one thing that I said to you twice that I consider to be very, very important. And that is that a union belongs to its membership. And that as members of the union, that you have certain rights. But in addition to the rights that you have as a member of a union, you also have certain obligations and certain responsibilities. And it's your responsibility to make a contribution to the efforts of your organization. The argument that you hold secretly in the back of your head that as one individual you're relatively unimportant in your union, that you have very little that you can do or say, is just as false as anything can be. You, regardless of where you sit in this hall, are just as important to this union as any other member of this union. And you can make as great a contribution to this union, to the organized labor movement, and to the overall welfare of your country as anyone else, if you will take the time and the effort, and if you will assume your responsibility as a trade union member. I wonder how many of you realize that all of the things that were accomplished in the trade union movement throughout its history, and relatively they were many, but all of these things, the wages I talked to you about, the conditions of employment, health and welfare plans, seniority, vacations, the free public school system, Social Security, unemployment compensation, and all of the other social reform legislation that organized labor had anything to do with. How many of you realize how many people in the labor movement actually put forth the efforts that made these things possible? When the labor movement had 5.5 million members, and many of these things were accomplished, do you suppose that 1 million helped accomplish these things? Or 500,000? No. A small handful, a relatively few of this number, are responsible for the activities, for the efforts, for the midnight oil, for the sacrifice that was necessary to bring these things about. Can you visualize in your own mind how much more we could have accomplished, how much more we would accomplish in the future if instead of 4% of the membership of the trade union movement being active and responsible for progress, we had 15%, or if we had 25%. And then can you visualize what a position we'd be in if 50% of the membership of unions was as active, or were as active, and as successful as those who are active and successful? You see, your own welfare and the welfare of your families and the welfare of their families to come are all involved in this thing. And if you, as an intelligent person, can only realize your own importance, your own potential for good through this kind of an organization, I'm sure that we in the labor movement can meet our problems successfully. I'm sure that we can beat down our opposition, and I'm sure that we can go forward to still greater and greater and greater things. And I sincerely trust that if I have accomplished nothing more tonight than to have impressed upon a few of you that you are important, that you are important to this union, and that you can do a great deal to help yourself and every other member of this union. And when you multiply this YOU several hundred times and perhaps several thousand times, you will have one of the most effective unions in the United States. And I would like to see you have one of the most effective unions in the United States. The solution to your problem is simple. Get the membership to fulfill the obligations they took when they became members of this union. Thank you very much. I hope you invite me back again.